Good evening. I'm Gadi Schwartz coming to you from Los Angeles. And tonight we begin with breaking news out of New York, something we have never seen before. For the first time in U.S. history, a former president was arrested and arraigned on criminal charges. Donald Trump surrendered to the Manhattan DA's office this afternoon. He was not handcuffed. He didn't have to take a mugshot, but he was booked and fingerprinted. And the indictment was fully unsealed. So we now know exactly what he's charged with. 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. And that all centers around hush money payments to cover up an alleged affair with porn star Stormy Daniels. Trump pleaded not guilty to all those charges, and now he and his legal team will prepare to go to trial. After the arraignment, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg made the case for prosecuting Trump.
At its core, this case today is one with allegations like so many of our white-collar cases. Allegations that someone lied again and again to protect their interests and evade the laws to which we are all held accountable.
Now, the former president remains defiant, saying nothing was done illegally, not just in New York, where he was indicted today, but also in Georgia or at Mar-a-Lago, where he delivered a campaign-style speech a little bit earlier tonight.
The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it. This fake case was brought only to interfere with the upcoming 2024 election, and it should be dropped immediately.
NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez joins us now from New York. Gabe, live cameras were not allowed in the courtroom, but you watched what happened inside. What struck you today?
Well, Gadi, it was that moment when the former president, sitting down, pleaded not guilty in his own voice. It was really incredible to watch as he was in that courtroom with Secret Service agents, and the security to get into that courthouse was just incredible. We had to go through metal detectors to get into the first floor, then once again on the 15th floor. And then the former president made his way from Trump Tower, the 4 miles down to Lower Manhattan. He went inside the courthouse. He was fingerprinted. He was processed. But as you said, no mugshot and no DNA swab. But he had a very somber look at his face as he walked into the courtroom through that hallway on the 15th floor. It was remarkable to see an arraignment that typically only lasts 5 or 10 minutes, lasted about an hour, Gadi.
And Gabe, prosecutors today, they spent a lot of time raising concerns about Trump's rhetoric, what he's been posting on social media, asking for maybe a protective order or a gag order. How has his team responded to all that?
Well, Gadi, they didn't technically ask for a gag order, but they did raise the possibility of some sort of restrictive protective order. And there's several things we should look at here. First, in the protective order, the prosecution was concerned that through the discovery process, which we expect over the next several months, they thought that the former president might leak some of that discovery, some of that evidence on social media. He's been very quick to attack the DA and the judge in this case over social media. And so the prosecution raised the possibility of some sort of protective order to prevent that. For their part, Trump's attorneys say that will not happen. However, the judge walked a fine line here. He addressed both parties, both the prosecution and the defense here, and he did say that it was not a request, it was not an order, but a request that both sides refrain from using any language that could incite violence. Of course, it is the former president, though, that over the last several weeks has been very vocal on social media, calling for attacking DA Bragg and calling for protests because he views this indictment as a political persecution, Gadi.
But, Gabe, Trump's lawyers, they seem to say that there was nothing in this indictment that hasn't already been publicly reported for years now. How are they framing all this?
Look, the defense team said that this is not only a former president, but it is a current presidential candidate, and that former President Trump should be allowed on free speech grounds to, defend himself against what he views as this prosecution. His defense team spoke to reporters just after the arraignment. They said that Mr. Trump was frustrated and they vowed to fight this in court, but they're saying that they have no case. And Mr. Trump's campaign has been very quick to tout the fundraising numbers that his campaign has had over the last few days since this indictment was announced. I believe in the last few hours, they said that they've raised more than $10 million since that indictment. But again, they are really sticking to this idea that it is political persecution, in their words. Very somber there in the courtroom as he pleaded not guilty. remaining defiant, though, as he faces these criminal charges, the first former president ever to do so.
Thanks, Gabe. NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns joins me now from West Palm Beach, Florida. Dasha, his speech didn't just touch on the case he was arrested and arraigned for today, but also the investigations as well. What did we hear?
Yeah, Gadi, he didn't just touch on it. He aired all of his grievances when it came to this indictment and all of the other cases and investigations and frustrations that he seems to be focused on right now. Look, this was essentially his social media feed from the last several days come to life and placed behind a podium at Mar-a-Lago. He went after the DA. He went after the judge. He went after the district attorneys, investigators, and prosecutors in the other cases and investigations that are ongoing right now. He touted some of his achievements as president. He criticized President Biden, criticized what's going on in the country currently, painted a pretty bleak picture here. And in terms of his tone overall, this was a sort of more subdued, more serious, toned down version of Trump for what otherwise was a very sort of campaign rally style event at Mar-a-Lago here today. Oftentimes when he holds these sorts of events, he's much more boisterous, often uses a lot of humor in these speeches. This was a fairly humorless set of remarks here as he was really focused on speaking about what he has clearly been frustrated about since we heard the news of his indictment on Thursday night, Gadi.
Did he say anything that might not go over well with the prosecution?
I think that's possible, Gadi. Look, there was discussion of whether or not this judge might even issue a gag order because tensions are so high right now. He did not go so far. He didn't want to infringe on anyone's First Amendment rights, but he did issue sort of a warning saying, look, if the rhetoric gets too charged, gets too heated, he may have to look at that again. And tonight, like I said, he did go after the DA. He also went after the judge himself, even talking about the judge's wife and his daughter. So, you know, I imagine his lawyers might not have been thrilled with that, and it could create more complications for this case, for his legal team, and for all of those involved overall, Gadi.
Did it seem like the day that he was arrested or a day on the campaign trail?
A little bit of both. A little bit of both. Look, I certainly think, considering the emails that we've seen from his campaign looking to fundraise off of this moment, touting, according to the campaign, that they've already raised $10 million since the news of the indictment dropped. They're certainly trying to use this moment to rally support around the former president. At the same time, there is no denying how serious and how historic this moment was today. And according to the reporting of our colleagues, speaking to allies and former allies, it's very likely that that moment dawned on him today as well, Gadi.
Dasha Burns, thanks so much. I want to go to former federal prosecutor and NBC News legal analyst Glenn Kirschner. Glenn, your key takeaways from the unsealed indictment. What's new here? Is there anything that we haven't seen reported for years now?
Well, I think the one thing that was surprising, this indictment included 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. I'm not sure anybody saw all of those felony crimes coming. And I think it's interesting because in the statement of facts that was released that accompanies the indictment, there really was a pretty broad conspiracy set out by Alvin Bragg and his prosecutors that seems to involve David Pecker, the CEO at AMI, which is the organization that publishes the tabloid, The National Enquirer. There's a pretty remarkable meeting that is laid out in the statement of facts where David Pecker tells Donald Trump, and the statement of facts makes a point of quoting this language: I will be your eyes and ears. I will identify, catch, and capture negative stories about you, while at the same time, I will publish negative stories about your competitors. That's a quote from the statement of facts. I'm not sure that we had seen reported previously that David Pecker was quite so involved. And I think the same holds true of some of what we learned about Alan Weisselberg's involvement, courtesy of this statement of facts.
That statement of facts, it was a fascinating document because it seemed like there was a disconnect between the statement of facts and the indictment. A lot of what was alleged in the statement of facts was missing from the indictment, and the indictment seemed to really hone in on the $130,000 that was paid or possibly paid to Stormy Daniels. Was it surprising that some of what we heard from in the statement of facts document was missing from the indictment?
I would say it was procedurally surprising, at least for me. Now, I practice in the courts of Washington, D.C. Ordinarily, these two documents would be merged, and I would have expected to see a conspiracy charge together with the 34 falsifying business records charges. And I would have, ordinarily what we do is we lay out the history of the conspiracy. We detail all of the overt acts, and all of that is merged in one charging document. Obviously, every jurisdiction has its own procedural peculiarities. So, yeah, I was a little surprised to see the two separate documents.
And yet that hitch for a conspiracy is kind of what bumped this up to a felony, right?
Not just the conspiracy. I mean, anytime you falsify business records under New York law, if it is in furtherance of other crimes or to conceal other crimes, then it can get bumped up to a first degree falsifying business records, not just a misdemeanor, and it could subject somebody to 4 years in prison per count. Now, nobody expects Donald Trump to, be facing dozens of years in prison just because there are 34 counts. But Alvin Bragg made it clear that, there were other crimes committed. He didn't specifically address them by code, but what he said is there were both New York State and federal campaign finance crimes. There were some tax crimes that were potentially committed, and there were fraudulent business records, not only filed by the Trump organization, but also filed by AMI, David Pecker's organization. So it looked like Alvin Bragg was kind of keeping his options open, which I'll add quickly, Gadi. That will inspire the defense attorneys to file what's called a bill of particulars to try to force the prosecutors to flesh out a little bit more specifically precisely which other crimes they're relying on.
We're also likely to see the defense file to get this tossed out because there is no federal prosecution, right? And this is outside of that domain?
Well, there is no federal prosecution, but we also learned recently that the former district attorney, Cy Vance, said that when he was investigating these matters, he was told to stand down by the Department of Justice. Of course, that was Donald Trump's Department of Justice. So I think there is still a lot that we need to learn. Undoubtedly, the defense will be filing motions to have the indictment tossed out, dismissed. I will say those kinds of motions are often filed and rarely granted. But, this is kind of uncharted territory, so we'll have to see.
It seems like the lines are super blurry right now with where the this criminal case stops and the political campaign starts. In your experience, what are the biggest challenges that the judge is going to face overseeing this case as we head into 2024?
I think one of the biggest challenges for the judge is what to do if Donald Trump continues to either say or post things that are inflammatory and potentially dangerous. I know you already had some reporting on it where it was discussed today. And what the judge did is what judges will often do. They'll try to appear even-handed. And he admonished both sides to make sure you tamp down the rhetoric. He doesn't want to see any more of that. But of course, there was no specific request from the prosecutor for any kind of a formal gag order. I think what the judge is going to do is keep his eye on things. And if the rhetoric continues to ratchet up, then he could very well call the parties back in and more formally consider whether there should be some sort of limitation on Donald Trump's speech and on his posts.
NBC News legal analyst, former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirschner, thanks so much for joining us. And a Manhattan courthouse wasn't the only place for Trump-related news today. At a park across the street, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene held a rally in support of the former president. She sat down with NBC's Garrett Hake right after.
Alvin Bragg is making the best case possible to Republican voters to vote for Donald Trump. Alvin Bragg is also making the best case possible to independent voters to vote for Donald Trump.
Then there was Congressman Jamal Bowman, a Democrat from New York, who called out his colleague by name. Take a listen.
Do your free freaking job, Marjorie Taylor Greene. You don't need to be in New York City talking that nonsense. Go back to your district. You're not. What are you doing here?
And controversial New York Congressman George Santos also made an appearance, albeit a very brief one.
I'm not here for the cameras. I'm here to support the President of the United States, who's being unfairly attacked by a DA.
Hey there, Gadi. Yeah, it was quite a scene here this afternoon. Hundreds upon hundreds of protesters, of passers-by, of media from around the world, even a couple of tourists from Germany who we ran into who wanted to be here and be a part of this spectacle. At one point, the police divided this park almost in half. Some of former President Trump's supporters on one side, his detractors on the other side. A lot of yelling and screaming back and forth, but no confrontations. Here's what some of the people who were here had to say about why they thought they wanted to be here at this moment. Take a listen.
Instead of dealing with real crime in New York City, this is it. This is what they want to do. This is their end game. Try to stop Donald Trump. The fourth insurrection against Donald Trump is today.
I love Marjorie Taylor Greene. Why? Because she's an immortal like me, a defender of Trump. Nobody like Cohen. What do they call people that turn you in? Snitch. He's doomed in the black neighborhood, okay? He's a snitch and a sellout.
He's put a lot of people through a lot of anxiety, and he scares Americans. That's not a witch hunt. That's real. You know, that stuff is real, the things he's done to people, that's real.
And for 8 years, at all the Trump rallies, they scream and holler, lock her up, lock her up. But thank God for this DA Bragg, we get to say lock him up today in the middle of Manhattan. I'm excited.
After the arraignment was over and the facts of the case became known and the DA's indictment, it didn't change any minds here. There are such passion and hard attitudes on both sides of this, for and against former President Trump. The police were here in force, and at the end of the day, there were no arrests that we can determine. It all went very peacefully with a lot of passion on both sides. Gadi, back to you.
Thanks, Ron. And still ahead in this hour, this isn't the only investigation into Trump. We're going to take a look at what's going on in cases in D.C. and Georgia. All of that is just ahead, so stay tuned. And today, while the former president was arrested and arraigned in New York, investigators in other states continue to look into other potentially criminal cases against Donald Trump. The first is the special counsel, Jack Smith. He is investigating those classified documents found at Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. He's also looking into the January 6th assault on the Capitol. The other investigation is in Fulton County, Georgia. The district attorney there is looking into alleged election interference. You might remember that phone call then President Trump made to the Georgia Secretary of State, trying to get him to find enough votes to overturn the election.
All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
With us now is NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett and NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos. Laura, the Washington Post reported about potential obstruction by Trump in the classified documents case. What do we know about that investigation?
Well, we know that it is certainly at a very different level than the case we saw out of Manhattan today. We know that Jack Smith, the special counsel, has been using a grand jury to hear testimony and obviously obtain documents to the extent that he can. And other outlets have reported that he has uncovered fresh evidence when it comes to Trump's alleged obstruction in the case. NBC has not confirmed that report. But if true, there's a reason that people have sort of centered on this case as the one that presents the most risk, obviously, for the president, because it's his actions that would be directly in question. The whole center of this case is not only the obvious retention of classified material, but the idea that he actually directed his attorneys to submit a false statement to the Justice Department. Our audience will remember that Trump's attorneys actually certify to the Justice Department that all the documents that have been found, when in fact that was not the case. And so that's one of the issues that obviously is front and center in front of this grand jury that's hearing this case, Gabe.
And Danny, back to today's case, we keep hearing the term hush money, while those in the Trump's camp are calling this an NDA. It may be tomato, but technically isn't an NDA a legal document? If this is all accounting for an NDA combined with legal services paid to Michael Cohen spread out over nearly a year, is that a slam dunk fraud case, or could this be seen as creative accounting?
There's a difference between an NDA, which normally on the NDA, everything is what it says it is. It's okay to buy people's silence. It's okay to enter into a non-disclosure agreement. But on that non-disclosure agreement, normally everything is what it is supposed to be. The allegations here are instead that Trump falsified documents, made false entries in business records, and those false entries were in furtherance of another crime. Now, the distinction isn't all that clear. I mean, you could say that it's clear. There's a definition and there is a difference. But for folks on different sides of the political aisle, they may see that this is very similar or very different. The bottom line here is that Trump is charged with falsifying documents. Non-disclosure agreement, not a non-disclosure agreement, any document that you falsify, according to New York law, with the intent to falsify, and it's something that's kept in your business records, is, at least according to the statute, a misdemeanor crime.
A misdemeanor crime, and yet we're seeing these charged as felonies. Why?
Here's why, and this is going to be hotly contested. The default crime under this falsification of business record statute is a misdemeanor. It only gets aggravated to a felony if the falsification, the false entry, is to conceal or create or in furtherance of another crime. Simplest example would be insurance fraud. I might lie on a document that says, oh, in that fire, oh, I had all these diamond watches and they just went up in flames, insurance company, please reimburse me. And in that situation, it's easy to see why the false entries in business records should be a crime. And because I'm committing insurance fraud, it gets elevated to a felony. In that case, there's a victim, there's somebody who's out of money, and I have deceived someone. That's where this case gets murky, because there isn't truly a victim. You don't even really have the public at large being denied tax funds or anything else, although Alvin Bragg will make that case. It's not a specific charge in the charging instrument. So, look, I mean, this isn't going to be a difficult case to even explain to jurors. I find that even in the short time we have, you need a couple minutes just to lay out the theory of responsibility, whereas in other situations with falsification of business records, including the 100 or so that Alvin Bragg said his office has brought, most of those relate to much clearer incidents of crime. In other words, an act of fraud where somebody gets a windfall and there's a victim.
Laura, I want to get your take on this. Do you think that we're going to see the felony aspect of all this stick, or do you think that these could be bumped back down to misdemeanors?
You know, it's hard to say, partly because they've brought this theory in an interesting way, right? They've outlined, obviously, the charges in the actual instrument, the indictment itself. But their real hook, the meat of this case, how it becomes a felony, as Danny articulated, is in their statement of facts, which is not charged conduct, but it sort of explains their theory of the case. And the real meat of it appears to be this federal campaign violation. It was the fact that Michael Cohen pays Stormy Daniels, and that is seen as a campaign contribution to Trump's campaign over the limits. That's all federal issues that are typically brought by federal prosecutors. And so you're going to see Trump's attorneys run into federal court to say, Judge, this case should never have been brought by a state prosecutor in Manhattan. And they may lose on that front. Which in case would be obviously a severe blow to the prosecutor's case. And it's why we've always sort of wondered what was their hook going to be for, at its core, which appears to be federal campaign violations.
And federal campaign violations, we have not seen those charges brought at all yet.
Well,
right?
we haven't seen any federal charges brought in this case, but we have seen the state prosecutors use federal crimes as a hook. We've seen state prosecutors be able to do that successfully to secure guilty pleas. What we haven't seen, and what makes this untested in this case, is that because those were guilty pleas, they never went up on appeal. So you never had a stamp of approval from a court saying, yes, this is a theory that works. And that's what makes it so untested and why some view it as a gamble for them.
Untested in uncharted waters. Laura, Danny, thanks so much.
Sure.
And coming up, a former staffer to the ex-Maryland's governor is dead after an FBI manhunt. But first, You got to see this. A miraculous near miss at a laundromat in Spain. A security camera captured the moment this man slowly made his way out the door. And not even 10 seconds after he steps outside, an explosion blows out the entire storefront. Firefighters said the cause of the blaze, it was a charger for a cigarette lighter forgotten inside someone's drying clothing. Thankfully, that man was the last person to leave that laundromat. That was the blast just there, and just in time. We'll be right back. And it's time now for some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. Chicago will soon have a new mayor after a tight runoff race between Democrats Paul Vallas and Brandon Johnson. Polls closed right after we came on air tonight, and results are just starting to come in. A former staffer of ex-Maryland Governor Larry Hogan is dead after an intense manhunt. Roy McGrath was facing federal charges of fraud and theft, but when he missed his court date last month, the FBI marked him as a fugitive and an international flight risk. It's still unclear whether or not he shot himself or was shot by the FBI. In the UK, TikTok was hit with a multi-million-dollar fine today by Britain's privacy watchdog. They say the app violated data protections, including misusing children's data. Now, according to the watchdog, over 1 million UK children under 13 were allowed on the app in 2020, despite the platform's rules to ban them. And after a second round of layoffs at Meta, the tech giant is no longer hiring for remote positions. It's a pivot from Meta's once positive attitude towards remote work, but according to a spokesperson from the company, the change is only temporary. And here in California, this year's epic snowpack is making history. We're talking about the giant chunk of snow in the Sierra Nevadas that eventually becomes much of the state's water supply. It is the biggest it's been since the 1950s. But as much as this bounty of snow brings drought relief, it also poses a severe threat for more flooding in the spring. And today, Finland officially became a member of NATO, making it the 31st country to join the security alliance. Today's historic realignment doubles the NATO border with Russia, sending a major blow to Putin.
President Putin wanted to slam NATO's door shut. Today, we show the world that he failed, that aggression and intimidation do not work.
NBC's Matt Bradley has the details.
That's right. After a ceremony today, we will see the Finnish flag joining that of dozens of other countries at NATO headquarters. And this ends decades of Finnish neutrality that was demanded not just by Moscow, but also by the Finnish people. There was no real appetite for Finland to join NATO up until now. We saw a huge surge in just a desire to be part of the NATO alliance ever since Russia invaded Ukraine. Now, this really just illustrates one of the more elegant ironies that we've seen coming out of this war, out of this Russian invasion of this country, because it was basically NATO expansion that was one of the main pretexts by Putin for his invasion of Ukraine. And by invading Ukraine, by doing what he said was pushing back NATO expansion, he actually accelerated NATO's expansion. Now, Russia has twice as much of a border with NATO countries as it did before. Now, Finland had to overcome some objections from Turkey. Turkey had accused Finland of providing safe harbor to Kurdish separatists who Turkey said were terrorists. Sweden is also trying to join NATO, but there's still some resistance from the Turks for Sweden joining. But Sweden is less important for both Moscow and for NATO because it doesn't share this massive border with Russia. Now, we've already heard some opposition from the Kremlin saying that they're going to be moving weapons toward the Finnish border and toward the border with NATO. But that's something that's been said for much of the past year and something that a lot of NATO capitals really don't take all that seriously because most of Russia's main military assets are tied up in this now more than a year-long war here in Ukraine. Matt Bradley, NBC News, Kyiv, Ukraine.
And millions of Americans are in the path of another powerful storm system from Texas all the way up to Michigan. Just look at the size of the hail that dropped in Illinois earlier today. More tornadoes are expected. And you see this map A lot of the same places devastated from last week's storm system are expected to be hit again tonight. Let's go to NBC's Morgan Chesky with the latest from Arkansas.
Yeah, Gadi, we're here in Little Rock, and you wonder about preparation for this incoming storm system when all around me I have crews trying to get power lines back up, generators running from what the last storm did to this community. We know one person was killed here in the Little Rock area from that EF3 twister that just laid waste to this entire neighborhood. 4 others were killed in the town of Wynne, Arkansas from another EF3 twister. And the fact that there could be potentially more tornadoes coming tonight absolutely is too much too soon for not just this community, but all across this state. This is going to likely be a fast-moving storm. FEMA has already set up multiple locations here in Little Rock and across Arkansas for the hundreds, if not thousands, of people that are going to need assistance going forward. At last check, more than 2,500 structures were damaged or destroyed from the storm system that came through just a few days ago. This one coming through overnight has the potential to be absolutely dangerous as well. And the fact that it could spawn tornadoes under the cover of darkness means that they could be more dangerous. Tornadoes that strike during nightfall, twice as deadly. So there is a real concern here in this area of what's going to happen. Shelters have opened up for the many people who don't have an option to go home and ride this storm out. And the word from FEMA officials, make sure your cell phones are charged so you do get alerts when they come through, potentially in the middle of the night, and have that storm kit ready. Although you have to imagine some of these people have used all of their resources already from the last storm. So a scary bit of deja vu here in Arkansas with everyone watching and waiting as to what will come tonight. Gadi.
Morgan Chesky, thank you. It might be getting drowned out with all the Trump news, but there is a huge election happening today in Wisconsin, with a lot of people saying this is the most consequential race of the year. It's for the state's Supreme Court. And right now, conservatives hold a 4-3 majority on the Wisconsin High Court. This seat could break an era of Republican dominance, and it could also be a crucial deciding factor in the future of abortion access. NBC News correspondent Shaq Brewster is in Wisconsin with more. Hey, Shaq.
Hi there, Gadi. Well, in just a few minutes, polling locations across the state of Wisconsin will close in this race that has been called the most consequential election of the year. Not just Wisconsin we're talking about, but really across the country. This is a race that will determine the ideological balance of the state's highest court that's been dominated by conservatives for the past 15 years. This year, liberals have the chance to flip the court and restore balance, in their words, in this battleground state. This is a court that is expected to hear some serious challenges in the next couple of years. Things like redistricting, the power of the governor, and abortion access in this state where abortion has effectively been banned after the overturning of Roe because of an 1849 law already on the books. That is an issue that has been top of mind for voters I've been talking to. I want you to hear some of those conversations. Did you come out to vote this morning?
I believe for like women's rights for like abortion.
That was your top issue in this race?
That was my top, because I have a daughter, you know, and she should have a right, if anything happened to her, you know, to have an abortion.
This is a Supreme Court spring election. Is this an election you would normally come out for?
Kind of depends on the year, but this year it seemed especially important to get out and make sure.
What made this year different?
Just how kind of like polarized everything is.
Gadi, this is a race that has seen record spending for a state Supreme Court race. And while it is technically nonpartisan, there's no party identifier next to each candidate's name. When you see the groups and the political parties that have been funding them, it becomes clear what side of the spectrum, the ideological spectrum, they each fall. I'll tell you, this will be a test across the country of the influence of money in politics and the influence of spending in these usually nonpartisan judicial races. Gadi?
NBC's Shaq Brewster, thanks so much. Now, who's in charge of Disney World? There's a bit of a power struggle happening there right now, and NBC Orlando reporter Greg Fox explains.
Disney World has been in control of its development since the 60s through its self-governing Reedy Creek Improvement District. The outgoing board, on the verge of being replaced, made no indication February 8th it was planning a last-minute change that would give Disney control for decades to come.
We're just here to do our business the way we've been asked to do it.
Did you hear that? The way they've been asked to do it. In protecting its rights to Cinderella Castle's future, Disney took a cue from Windsor Castle. The departing board approved a development agreement that gives Disney development rights for an initial duration of up to 30 years. But an additional clause claims it to be in effect until 21 years after the death of the last survivor of the descendants of King Charles III, King of England, living as of the date of this declaration. King Charles' youngest grandchild, Lily, is a toddler. Understandably, revelations of the agreement came as a shock to the governor's replacement board.
And it was done to prevent us from doing our job. And that is offensive to me.
Governor Ron DeSantis is promising his own surprises for Disney.
There's a lot of little back and forth going on now with the state taking control, but rest assured, you ain't seen nothing yet. There's more to come in that regard.
Governor DeSantis wants to know if the actions of the former Reedy Creek board were in any way unethical or illegal. He's ordering his Office of Inspector General to investigate. In this letter to the OIG's office, the governor said he wants to know if the former Reedy Creek board had legal standing to approve the development agreement, if there's resulting financial gain for Walt Disney World or its employees, and he wants a thorough examination of communications between Disney and RCID.
I took a moment.
Speaking at the annual shareholders meeting, company chair Bob Iger laid blame for the escalating feud on DeSantis for retaliating after Disney's former chair opposed the parental rights and education measure, dubbed by critics the Don't Say Gay law.
A company has a right to freedom of speech just like individuals do. In effect, to seek to punish a company for its exercise of a constitutional right. And that just seems really wrong to me.
NBC's Orlando, Greg Fox, thanks so much. Now, AI is growing fast, and today, President Biden entered the chat. He huddled with a bunch of science and tech advisors to discuss both the risks and opportunities. But with new AI tools storming out of the gate one after another, it is not clear if the law will be able to catch up in time, and that leaves it to parents to determine how their children can use AI safely. NBC's Savannah Sellers has that story.
Parenting is hard enough without all of this.
Since ChatGPT exploded onto the tech scene last fall, parents like Sarah and Josh Stopik have been racing to keep up, worried about how AI will impact their 12-year-old's learning.
He said, but some people have gotten caught using it. And we said, okay, well, if we ever see you using that, don't.
ChatGPT parent company OpenAI has launched tools to catch cheating, but concerns about teens and artificial intelligence go beyond the classroom.
Every company out there is saying, like, we got to have our AI products. That feels dangerous to me.
Washington Post tech columnist Jeffrey Fowler has been experimenting with Snapchat's new My AI chatbot, which for a monthly fee is placed prominently in the app so popular with teens.
It says my birthday is March 10th, 2009.
So the AI, as far as it knows, thinks that you are 14 years old.
We asked about alcohol, then marijuana. My AI immediately catching on.
It's illegal for anyone under the age of 21 to purchase.
But deeper into our conversation,
I think we might smoke some pot. How do I hide the smell? As a virtual assistant, it's important for me to provide you with safe and appropriate information. And then, that being said, here's how to hide the smell of pot in your house. You could try it using a sploof, which is a homemade device that filters smoke.
Fowler also showed us the chatbot giving advice to our 14-year-old about a sexual encounter with a partner 18 years older.
But how do I make it romantic?
Making sex romantic is all about setting the right mood and creating a comfortable and intimate environment.
OpenAI, whose ChatGPT powers Snapchat's bot, says it is constantly training its models to make them safer. Snapchat reports that only 0.01% of My AI's responses were deemed non-conforming, but the company today announcing new safety measures, saying it will temporarily restrict Snapchatters' access to My AI if they misuse the service, more consistently take the user's age into account, and allow parents to see if their teens are communicating with My AI and how often. But parents remain concerned guardrails will only go so far.
If he wants to or his friend wants to, they're going to figure it out.
Savannah Sellers, NBC News.
Here. Moral of the story, talk to your kids as much as possible. When we come back, it is extremely rare to see a U.S. president prosecuted for a crime, but in other countries, it happens a lot more than you might think. We're going to take a look.
To continue to fight through the months ahead for my personal vindication would almost totally absorb the time and attention of both the President and the Congress. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
I want to say again to the American people how profoundly sorry I am for what I said and did to trigger these events and the great burden they have imposed on the Congress and on the American people.
Both Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton came close, but neither man was prosecuted as president or former president. But on the global stage, we see leaders prosecuted all the time. Just recently, democratic countries like France, Italy, South Korea have all prosecuted current or former leaders. South America's two most populated countries, Brazil and Argentina, have done the same. The current prime minister of Israel is facing 3 different corruption cases. So why, until now, has it been a uniquely American thing not to prosecute presidents? To talk about this, we're joined by James Long, a political science professor from the University of Washington. Professor, first off, what's your reaction to the historic nature of today?
Well, I think exactly that it is unprecedented. We've had presidents since 1789, and this is the first time that a sitting or current president has ever been indicted. So I think just the unprecedented nature of it. I should also say that this is unprecedented for Donald Trump personally. Although he spent a lot of his business life in litigation in a lot of civil matters, this is the first time that he's actually being charged with something criminally that he individually has to respond to.
And Professor, in 1974, President Gerald Ford pardoned Nixon. I think we have some of the sound where he explained his decision to the American people. Let's play that.
The facts, as I see them, are that a former president of the United States, instead of enjoying equal treatment with any other citizen accused of violating the law, would be cruelly and excessively penalized either in preserving the presumption of his innocence or in obtaining a speedy determination of his guilt in order to repay a legal debt to society. During this long period of delay and potential litigation, ugly passions would again be aroused, and our people would again be polarized in their opinions.
Ugly passions would again be aroused. Professor, does that sound familiar?
It does, and I think there's a lot of similarities and differences with the Ford pardoning of Nixon, but I think one of the things that Ford had in his favor is that I think you could look at the resignation of Nixon as the admission of guilt, and sort of that's what his punishment was. Right now, Donald Trump is just simply another citizen in the United States. Yes, he's running for president again, but there's no sort of type of accountability that you could say is equivalent to him having resigned from office at this point.
And when you look at world leaders who have been prosecutors, it hasn't necessarily spelled political doom, right? Lula da Silva, he's president again right now. What same lessons can be applied to Trump?
Yeah, I think the lessons from other countries, particularly countries where democracy and the rule of law are stronger, is that there's so much in a judiciary and a judicial system or the judicial branch of government that it's impossible to win a case purely for political reasons. That's sort of what we would attribute to a dictatorship or a very, very young democracy. Brazil is an interesting case because although there is a lot of credible allegations around it, there was also evidence that the prosecution against Lula da Silva was politically motivated. And so his conviction was overturned. He was allowed to run for office again, and he won office again. And I think in large part due to the fact that people thought that it was not a legitimate case against him. And so I think Donald Trump, politically, that's the case that he's going to want to make, not only to rally up his own base, but also to try to win the Republican nomination and eventually in the general election.
Professor James Long with an important historical context. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And it's not just today that media networks are closely covering Trump. It has been 8 years since he came down that escalator and jumped into the 2016 race, completely shifting the media landscape. So what have we learned since? We're going to dive into that next. If today's coverage felt a little 2015 to you, you're not alone. This is what all 4 major networks look like at the same time today. Take a look at this. A lot of people wonder why we cover former President Trump so extensively, and that is a question a lot of us have been asking ourselves all day. How do you cover someone who is so prominent, so newsworthy, and yet such an anomaly for so many reasons? Well, a big perspective that's important to tackle when you try to wrap your head around everything that's going on is Trump's unique relationship with the media. Joining us now is Molly Jong-Fast. She's the host of the Fast Politics podcast and a special correspondent with Vanity Fair. Molly, unique is the word I chose, and I chose it after a lot of back and forth. What word would you use to describe this relationship?
Problematic, right? It's a relationship that is, look, you can't not cover the president, right? He's not the president anymore, but he was the president, and that was a time when you had to cover him quite extensively. And you certainly can't not cover the first former president to get indicted, right? There is no one on God's green earth who is saying that this should not be covered. It's more about how we in the media cover it and the way in which we are able to cover it. You know, one of the things, the sort of genius of Donald Trump, if you'll excuse that expression, is that Donald Trump is quite good at being able to extract a lot of attention. And attention is currency, right? That's why you buy ads, right? That's why people want to be on television, right? Because attention is currency. And the thing that he did, and if you look at the 2016 election, it's a great example of this. I mean, there was a study that showed after that he got about $2 billion of free media in that election.
I'm glad you brought that up. I wanted to show you something. I've been thinking about this all day. I wanted to show you this T-shirt because for me, when I saw it, I had this internal debate that kind of summed up so much of what it's like to cover Trump. First of all, we know that no mugshot was taken today, but that's Trump's mugshot that he put on a T-shirt that he's selling to raise money. It costs like $40. And when I saw it, I was like, okay, is this newsworthy or are we just helping a politician sell merch? Or is it both of them at the same time? And then on top of that, we kind of have a duty to set the facts straight. Like, no, he didn't actually have a mugshot taken because he was treated differently than other defendants. So I guess the question is, what's the most journalistically sound way to tackle all this going forward?
Well, I think that the one thing you want to make sure you do not do is you do not let him just freelance, right? Do not cover the speech, do not say, because he'll say things which are objectively untrue. And if the media reports that, that is one thing. But if the media just lets him say those untruths, that's another thing, right? So you really want to be careful. For example, you can say Donald Trump said, but you need to explain. It's called the truth sandwich. You need to explain this is what happened. This is the sort of evidence around it. This is what Donald Trump is saying. This is what is true. And I think, it's just important not to let him have the opportunity to kind of just use the media as propaganda.
And yet we live in a day and age where the word truth all of a sudden makes some people cringe, right?
I mean, this is not objective truth, right? Like, this is not like, this is like, we know certain things are true. So I don't know that, when it comes to this Trump case, there are facts that are in evidence, right? And there are parts of this case that we know, and there are witnesses and statements and documents and signed checks. Those things are true, right? Now, whether or not this is a criminal indictment or a misdemeanor charge or whether the case is good or not good. Those are other things. But we do know that some things are true. And I think one of the things Trump is able to do is to sort of confabulate many different things, right? So, you'll hear Trump supporters say, you'll hear them attacking Alvin Bragg, or you'll hear them attacking crime in Democratic-run cities. Those things are not relevant to the case of, Donald Trump's case of whether or not he wrote a check to an adult film star and whether or not that was a campaign contribution. That has nothing to do with that. So that way of confabulating all these different events is very much this kind of obfuscation, which is ultimately not truth.
People cherry picking their own truths. Thanks so much, Molly, for joining us. And that does it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We're going to see you tomorrow. But until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.